All right, all right. Good evening, good evening, good evening, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me loud and clear. My name is Willie Lightfoot, City Councilman at Large. Welcome to the November Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition meeting. Before we go into our moment of silence, I'm going to do introductions first. All right, Penny.
Sorry.
And then we will have our introduction of everyone. We'll go around the room here in person, and then we'll do our Hollywood Squares. We have some great guests that are with us today that we're very excited about our conversation that we're going to be having today. And I'll start to my right with our council president.
Good evening, everyone. Miguel Melendez, City Council President.
I don't know if you guys can see me yet. I'm still logging in, but Mike Patterson, City Council, Northeast District. If you can hear me, that's probably good enough. You'll see me in the room. Oh, well, you ain't gotta move the ball.
There you are.
Okay, Mike Patterson, City Council, Northeast District.
All right, our Hollywood Squares. We'll start with, from my left, we have Kathy.
Hi, I'm Kathy. I'm with Brady United Against Gun Violence and the Rochester Coalition Against Gun Violence.
Councilmember Harris.
Hi, I'm Lachey Harris, City Council South District, and I'm a member of the coalition.
Andre.
Hi, Andre Gully, Legislative Aide for Councilman Willie Lightfoot and Lead Assistant for the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition.
Steve.
Hello, Steve Lindley. I'm with the Brady campaign. I'm actually out here in Los Angeles, and it's a pleasure to be here this evening.
Josh.
Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Scharf. I'm General Counsel and Director of Programs at Brady. I'm calling in from Washington, D.C. tonight, and thank you for inviting us to be your guests. Really happy to be here.
We got LA, we got DC, we got Rochester, man. They don't know Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition is international, man. We're global. Also, we have our good friend, Deb.
Good evening, everybody. Deb Antoniadis, volunteer leader with Moms Demand Action, Rochester, New York, local group.
Inez.
Hi, I'm Inez Ashiyama. I also work for Brady. I'm on the same team as Josh and Steve, and I am from Washington, D.C., Nova area.
Welcome, welcome. And Captain Murrah via phone.
Good evening, everybody. Captain Mark Muro of the Rochester Police Department's Community Affairs Bureau, and I have been with the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition from the beginning.
He's one of our day ones. Yes, you have, sir. And we appreciate all the work that you do. And I think we'll give a couple minutes because Shawnee is coming in. She's entering now. She's entering the room, and we'll give her a couple minutes to log on. Shawnee, we are doing introductions. She's connecting. Shawnee, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Shawnee Williams. I am with the social media team for Rock Against Gun Violence, also the CEO of Morgan Williams Youth Advocate Program.
Welcome, welcome. All right, it is our tradition here at the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition that we, first of all, we stop and we pause and we recognize the impact that violence and gun violence has done to our citizens in our community. Most recently, a 14 and 16-year-old were shot here locally in our city. A 14-year-old was murdered. We're also imploring our citizens out there to come forward with any information that you may have in some of these recent homicides that we've had in our city, to include the former police officer, Booker, that was murdered on Jefferson Avenue. We're asking you to reach out to Crime Stoppers and please give any information. If you've seen something, please say something so we can help bring justice to these families and individuals who are impacted by these crimes, heinous crimes that we've had in our community. So I would ask for all of our members if we would pause for a moment of silence to recognize and honor all of the victims and families of the violence and gun violence within our community and across our country. Thank you. Tonight is a very, very special night for us. You should see in the chat, there is an agenda. We had our introductions. We're gonna have an RPD quick update from RPD, and then we're going to yield and I'll come back and introduce again our guest speakers that are here today with us from Brady. And we want to take an opportunity to get a chance to, and I'll go into it a little further after our introduction from RPD or our update very briefly, because I know Captain Mura is kind of moving in his place. So we want to give you an opportunity, Captain Mura, to go ahead and just give us a brief update on where you are and whatever information you have at this point. Please, sir.
Very good. Thanks, Councilman. I'll just go through the general stats. Our stats, believe it or not, are actually down from last year, which is excellent, but they're still atrocious. So we definitely need to keep working. So I'll run through them real quick. To date, we're at 74 homicides for the city. That's a little bit behind pace from last year. As we know, last year was a record year, unfortunately. So I'd like to see that number at 0, as we all would, but 74 is not acceptable. We got to keep pushing and working. As far as the median age of our victims, our homicide victims, it's 29 years old. Last year, it was 28 years old. We have had a total of 283 shootings where there were victims this year, which resulted in a total of 325 shooting victims. So 325 shooting victims, 74 homicides. And as of last week, RPD had taken 722 illegal guns off the street. So that number is a little bit higher now, but we won't have the final numbers until the following week. So right now we're right around 730 guns off the street. So that's what I have. Statistics. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Well, first of all, those are very staggering numbers. Every time, and sobering numbers. Every time that we get these updates from RPD, I think it really continues to keeps us on our path of why we do what we do. And we commend the work that you guys are doing day to day. Over 700 guns taken off the street is amazing. But we know that we still have a lot of work to do when it comes to getting those illegal guns off our street. We'll pause for a minute because before we take questions for Captain Murray, if there are any, very quickly we have some new individuals, guests that have come with us and joined us, and we want to give them an opportunity for them to introduce themselves, and we'll take time to do that now.
My name is Ruth Reeves. I'm an activist in the city. I am a minister in the church. I've been working many years in the city of Rochester in regards to the gun violence, and just my whole being is to change the minds of the young men and women that's on the streets. Because yes, we have a lot of gun violence, but we have other things going on too. I mean, we got gang problems, we got drug problems, we got young people on the street because they're homeless, they couldn't get along at home. We got a host of issues that needs to be addressed. And I'm so glad that you are addressing something. Somebody is doing something. I don't know, our police department is in a bad place right now. I understand that. They're understaffed and they can't be every place at all times. We need our community to step up if you see something, say something. We say that all the time. Mm-hmm. But if a mother see her child with a gun, that can only be trouble one way or the other. Say something about it. If you don't want to, they don't want to go to the police, they don't want to talk to the police, there's plenty of opportunities of people in the community that they could go to that could get help for them and their children. I mean, so I'm so thankful that you're doing this, and I'm hoping to become a part of it, so that maybe you can get further out in the community than we have been getting. This summer, I did a summer program, and where we went into all the parks in the city, in the bad areas of the city, and we worked with the young people and handed out flyers and gave out food and information. And we had Fidelis their insurance that they needed insurance because so many of the inner city people don't have insurance, just everything, and this is what I'm about. This is what I do all day, every day.
We can feel your passion, Ruth, and we thank you for the work that you do in our community. And you're more than welcome at our table, a seat at our table. Thank you so much for becoming and being a partner with us.
My name, excuse me, is Libby Lynn.
Mhm.
I live in Rochester. I have since 2020. I work for a local merchant and I'm here to learn. And I'd like to be part of the prevention.
Well, thank you, Libby, and welcome. And we're glad that you have a seat at our table as well. And we're so glad to have you here with us. It's a pleasure to have you a part of our team. Does anybody have any questions for Captain Mura before we move on? Kathy.
I have a question.
Okay, Councilmember Harris and then Kathy.
Captain Mura, the numbers that you gave, and I believe that you might have said it, I must have missed it. Can you give me the date for the data that was collected for the guns? You said more than 700 guns were collected. Is that for the whole year? And if so, what was the time frame?
Yes, ma'am. 722 guns for the entire year up till last week.
Thank you kindly.
Absolutely.
Captain Mura, this is Kathy. I was following up actually on Council Member Harris's question. Just quick question. It seems like the RPD is really collecting a lot of guns every single year. Like if you look back, it's several hundred each year. So I was just wondering, what does RPD think? Where do they think these guns are coming from? Where are they being supplied from?
Well, I believe I sent out an email a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago, pardon me, but generally they're coming from all over the place. The vast majority of them are coming from out of state, but every now and then we'll get guns that were taken in burglaries or people leave them in their cars here locally. But for the most part, they're out of state, and a percentage of those guns are ghost guns where they're manufactured in-house. Somebody's just getting the parts randomly from across the country or the internet, and they're putting them together. So they really are coming from all over the place, but the vast majority come from out of state.
May I follow up with just one question, Captain?
Certainly.
So are you documenting when you're collecting, now you have up to 722, are you documenting how many came from out of state and which state? How many came from a robbery? How many were reported stolen? Those kinds of data points.
Yes, all those statistics are kept.
So do we know how many actually came from out of state? How many came from in-state in this up to this point?
I don't have that information with me, but I can get it relatively easy and I'll email it out.
Thank you, Captain Mura.
No problem.
I have a follow-up question as well.
Councilmember Harris.
Thank you very much, Councilman Lightfoot. Following up to what Kathy asked, that information, again, thank you so much for collecting that data. I would really love it if that data can be shared, an open data portal. I'm not sure if that's something that you guys can do. If you guys can look into that, because that would be valuable information for those of us in the community at large and those of us that are on council to have access to.
I will look into that, and as long as there are no issues as far as prosecutions and things like that when it comes to trying a case, I don't foresee any issues. As long as it's generic intelligence and information, I don't see a problem with that whatsoever. So I'll speak with the command staff and I'll make sure that if we can do it, it's done.
Thank you kindly.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Captain Mura. Again, one of our day ones. We appreciate you, and we're always praying for our men and women in blue. We know that the job is a very tough job, and we appreciate the work that you guys are doing. Tonight is a very special night because we have with us, and I promise you, I didn't plan this. This was definitely something that was just happened this way. But a year ago tomorrow, we stood in this building, and Mayor Warren, myself, and we signed, and Brady, and signed a memorandum of understanding agreement for the gun trace data report to work with Brady to create a Rochester gun trace data report, which we've never had before. And it'll be a year ago tomorrow that we sat and made that agreement. I appreciate the work and the commitment of former Mayor Warren. And I also want to acknowledge and appreciate the commitment of this council, as well as the commitment from the current administration, Mayor Evans, for continuing that agreement and working on that commitment to produce once and for all, to answer the decade-old question that all of us have asked in this room, and what we've also heard asked tonight, of where are the guns coming from? We want to answer that question, not what we think. Oh, we think they're coming from the stores. We think they're coming from out of state. We want to prove with the data where they're coming from. And we want to be able to utilize the new laws that New York State has put in place of a gun dealer code of conduct, which holds gun dealers accountable for these illegal guns being trafficking into our communities and taking the lives of people that are citizens in our community. So with that being said, I asked Brady, we're very fortunate, and I want to make this very clear. And Brady, you can, and we have council members here. Brady's not charging us a dime. And that's unusual to get, my colleagues are laughing here. That is somebody asked me, Lynette Adams, we did a report, some of you saw in Focus on Sunday, and one of the questions that was asked to me, is it because of how much it costs, why it's taking so long? And I said, there is no cost. And they go, are you kidding me? You know, Brady are experts in this field. They've done gun trace data reports in Chicago. They've done gun trace data reports in Pennsylvania. And so we are very fortunate and blessed to be able to have Brady partner with the city of Rochester to present a comprehensive gun trace data report for the citizens here. But the problem with that is many people don't know what that means. What is a gun trace data report? What is the impact that a gun trace data report can have for communities that have high level of crime to gun homicides within their community? And I asked Josh Scharf and Steve Lindley, who are experts in this, to come and share with us and the overall community. We are streaming live on our City Council YouTube page. This session tonight is also being streamed on our Facebook page. People can go back, they can listen to this information, they can share this information. So I want to yield the floor to Josh and Steve to take us down that road and journey of what is a gun trace data report? What does it mean? What have you done in other communities, and what could this do for the city of Rochester? And then we have some opportunity. We give them about a half hour to 45 minutes to do their presentation, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions at the end. This is a very important topic, and I don't want to rush it. I want us to take our time and get an understanding of what this is, because we have a lot of people say, oh, well, data's not going to, but then people say, oh, but we need to follow the data. But then when we talk about gun data, people say, oh, that's not going to help stop the crime and the violence in our community. So I want the experts to yield the floor to them, and then they can take it from there. So Josh or Steve, the floor is yours. And thank you and welcome. And thank you for partnering with the city of Rochester in this historic opportunity that we have that can really transform our community.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Lightfoot, and thank you again to everyone here for having us tonight. We're just really excited to meet all of you. I've heard quite a bit about this group from Kathy and from Councilmember Lightfoot and others. So it's really just our great opportunity to meet you tonight and to have an opportunity to have a real conversation with you about crime gun trace data and why it matters. Yeah, and yes, it's true. We are doing all of this work for free for the city of Rochester. We're more than happy to do so. Perhaps one day I'll have a career not as a nonprofit lawyer, but that's basically what I am right now, and we do a lot of things for free. Let me just quickly give you my background. I'll give Steve an opportunity to introduce himself and let you know about his background, and then we'll jump into it and walk through our presentation tonight. As I mentioned before, I'm General Counsel, Director of Programs at Brady. I started at Brady about 5 years ago. I came on as a litigator representing victims of gun violence against gun industry businesses that had negligently, illegally, irresponsibly transferred firearms to individuals that should not have had them. As a result of those transfers, my clients were killed and injured by those firearms. About 3 years ago or so, I switched over to Brady's programs and policy side to be able to take a lot of the lessons learned about what happens in gun stores when guns are transferred in a manner that is not responsible and without an eye towards public safety, how that affects gun violence rates, how that affects real people, and to be able to take some of those lessons learned and apply them more programmatically and also in our policy work as well. Let me stop there with my introduction. I'll tell a little bit about our program when Steve gives me the mic back, but let me pass it over to Steve to introduce himself.
Thank you. So my name is Steve Lindley. I'm out here in Southern California. My background is in law enforcement. I spent 28 years in law enforcement, the last 10 years as the chief of the California Department of Justice Bureau of Firearms, which is tasked here in California with regulating the firearm industry, whether that is conducting the background checks for all legal firearm transfers or purchases, regulating the firearm industry for the manufacturers and for the gun dealers here in California. We also have a program out here called the Armed Prohibited Person System, which identifies individuals who have once legally purchased firearms, but subsequently became prohibited, no longer can possess the firearms. And at that time, the Bureau of Firearms, along with local agencies, went out and conducted task force investigations to remove those firearms from those individuals. So I have extensive knowledge of the firearm industry out here in California and the uses of a trace report and how it can help identify the supply side of firearms. Oftentimes what happens is law enforcement only looks at the person who is possessing it and doesn't really investigate. I'm sorry, I'm also a high school teacher, and I'm in my classroom right now and my light's turned off. So let me make sure that turns on. There you go. I teach forensic science in high school part-time as well. Okay, so looking at how firearms can come from the industry through the wholesalers and to the dealers is very important to find out where these firearms are actually coming and the supply side of them. The data is relatively old because of certain federal regulations, but about 90% of all the firearms that are recovered in the streets come from only about 5% of the firearm dealers out there. So just a few investigations of the right dealers, or should I say the wrong dealers, has an incredible impact on the number of firearms that are being used illegally in our communities. Josh.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And building off what Steve said there, the program that we specifically all work on at Brady is called the Combating Crime Guns Initiative. And we refer to it really as our supply side approach to preventing gun trafficking. And by supply side, we are focused on the entire supply chain of what are ultimately crime guns or often trafficked firearms. And that goes from manufacturer through distributor, gun dealer, to a member of the public, and ultimately to its recovery at some point by law enforcement. We are laser focused on the different intervention points along that supply chain of crime guns, of where something could have been done differently, where a different policy or business practice could have been adopted that would have prevented a gun from being diverted from the legal to the illegal market. And the role of the gun industry is incredibly, as Steve was saying, incredibly important here. We believe that there are common sense business practices, simple business practices that the gun industry can and should adopt that would greatly reduce the number of firearms that are being diverted from the legal to the illegal market. And make no mistake, the overwhelming majority of gun dealers are law-abiding citizens that want to transfer guns safely and not cause any risk to the public safety. But as Steve mentioned before, a small minority for decades have been responsible for the overwhelming majority of guns that are being recovered by law enforcement. So what we're here to talk to you about today is basically trace reports, crime gun trace reports. And, you know, our work is really driven by data. And in one of the key pieces of data that drives a supply side approach is trace data. So just to make sure we're all on the same page here, just a real quick introduction to trace data. And I'll turn it back over to Steve in a little bit, who can go through in a little bit more detail what particular data points we often look at and why those matter and what that can tell us. But ultimately, when a gun is recovered by law enforcement, there is information that local law enforcement or the recovering agency is able to collect right there. And that information is the make, the model, the serial number of the firearm, where it was recovered, when it was recovered, who was the possessor of that firearm if it was possessed at the time, if it was recovered as a result of a crime or a potential crime, what kind of crime that was, a variety of information that's actually really important. Now, the information that can be taken off the gun by the recovering agency, the make, the model, the serial number, can then be run through the firearms trace system that's run by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. It is commonly referred to as E-Trace, where the information about that firearm is plugged into the E-Trace system, and ATF can then trace that firearm from its manufacturer to its distributor to its last retail seller, and ultimately, by contacting the last retail seller, who the first purchaser of that firearm was. When we talk about trace data, we're talking in essence about both sides of that, the recovery and then the trace of that firearm. And too often, right, trace data is thought of as only a lead, right, for a particular criminal investigation. And it's absolutely true, right? It is, right? Knowing who was the first purchaser of a firearm, can help lead to, finding out who committed a crime. And also can figure out how that firearm ended up in that person's possession. But trace data is more than just a lead for an individual case. And too often it's not thought of that. Trace data can be aggregated, based on, for example, a city like Rochester or a region or a state or at the national level. And researchers, people often, that study this for a living, can look for trends, can look for information about what does it tell us about gun trafficking? What does it tell us about gun crime? What does it tell us about the supply chain of crime guns? And aggregating this information is incredibly, incredibly important. And I would say that aggregating it at a local level or a regional level is particularly important because every location has its own struggles with gun violence, and that looks different than other locations, right? Just because firearms may be trafficked into Rochester in one way does not mean that they're being trafficked into Buffalo that same way, or that they are trafficked into Los Angeles or Chicago or Kansas City or wherever it may be in that same way. So I think locally aggregated data is particularly important to communities. Now, as Steve mentioned, it used to be quite easy to get access to trace data at the national level. It could be provided to members of the public through FOIA requests, through ATF releases. About 2 decades ago, the gun industry got legislation passed through Congress that made it much more difficult for that data to be released by the federal government. And the way that ATF has interpreted that over many years has kind of chilled the release of information that we think can be aggregated and put out to the public. So this data, unfortunately, while it's really rich, it's used by ATF, itself in a variety of different ways. It unfortunately is not out in the public and is not in the hand of researchers, of community activists, of everyone else who would need access to it to really better understand these trends. So the important thing that I want to really emphasize before turning it over to Steve and talking through exactly that data is that a crime gun trace report in this data is a first step. It is not a solution in of itself, right? As Councilmember Lightfoot put very well in the beginning, is that we should be following the data, right? When it comes to gun violence prevention. And what a crime gun trace report is and trace data is the data, right? But once we know what that data says, what stories that tells, what likelihoods it suggests, only then can communities really craft solutions, supply side solutions or other types of solutions that would really address the issue of trafficked firearms. So this effort, in order to put a crime gun trace report together for Rochester, is really a building block. It is one to be able to get this data out to the community so that the community itself can start taking a look at solutions that will be most effective for Rochester. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do what we all try to do in this world of Zoom and do my best to share my screen here. So let me ask the question. Can folks see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Excellent. So now I'm going to try to switch this to a slideshow so that maybe folks can see it even better. Real quickly, just to kind of go through what we want to cover, we want to talk a little bit more about gun trace reports and the data that's in them. We want to talk a little bit more about how it can benefit Rochester, and then give a quick update about where we are on the project since we're about a year into it. And when I will say, and I'm going to post in the chat before I turn it over to Steve, as Councilmember Lightfoot, and as long as I can find the chat here, I will post it when I turn it over to Steve. But as Councilmember Lightfoot had mentioned before, we recently did do a trace report based on data for the entire state of Pennsylvania, and found some really interesting things in that data. That is the largest trove of trace data that has been released to the public in about 2 decades. And a lot of those statistics that Steve had mentioned before really seem to hold true with this more recent data. We'll be referencing that report. I'm going to put a link to it in the chat as soon as I find that chat, so that you guys have access to that report as well. But let me turn it over to Steve to really jump into some of the things that can go in the data that goes into a trace report.
Thank you, Josh. So when we talk about a trace report, we're talking about finding the story behind firearms that are used in crimes in any particular community, whether that's in New York City, whether that's Syracuse, whether that's Rochester, again, whether that's Chicago or Los Angeles. So there is a story behind that firearm, and how law enforcement oftentimes looks at it, because of the limited resources that most law enforcement agencies have, is just who is using that firearm. They don't really have the ability to go back and investigate where did that firearm come from. However, through the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, they do have the ability to what they call is trace the firearm. So with some basic information that you can either do through paper or now via online, you provide ATF with some information about the firearm and about the person who was in possession of it illegally, or used it in a crime, and that gives ATF the ability to go back and produce kind of a story by where and how that firearm ended up in the hands of an individual in, let's say, Rochester, and provide that to law enforcement. However, what happens with that information is oftentimes that information is only provided to the individual officer or detective who's requesting it, and oftentimes isn't looked at as a whole by the police agency. And that happens across the nation because there's just so much that law enforcement has to do. So one of the things that a trace report does is it gets all that information that is supplied to a particular police department or community like Rochester, and you analyze it, because again, trends in Rochester are going to be different than in other parts of New York State or other parts of the country. So some of the things that is required for this trace report and we look at is the dealer of origin. Where did that firearm come from? Now, obviously, you have a make and model of that. So we know that, let's say, and I'm not picking on any particular manufacturer, but let's look at Glock. You know that Glock is one of the most popular firearms in the country. So you would assume that'd be one of the most popular firearms that's recovered by law enforcement. So you know where that gun started from. It started from a plant that produced Glock pistols. Well, they keep records about what wholesalers or where they send that firearm, and ultimately what dealer, what licensed firearm dealer sold that firearm. And that firearm dealer is obligated to keep records on who they sold that firearm to, which would be important as we go down. But you want to know about some of the firearm characteristics, so you can look at trends when it comes to the type of crime guns that are being used in your particular community and maybe around neighboring communities. So manufacturer, the type, the caliber of the firearm are important, but not nearly as important as the purchaser or the possessor of the firearm and the time to crime. And what the time to crime really is when was the firearm purchased and then when was it used in a crime. So if you have a long time to crime, let's say, 10, 15, 20 years, it's hard to identify that maybe a dealer or a wholesaler was really the problem in the selling of that firearm or the transfer of that firearm, that they had some bad practices. Because over time, things are going to happen. But if you have a short time to crime, less than 3 years, or oftentimes that we see sometimes just a few months, and a high quantity of firearms from a particular dealer with a short time to crime are ending up on the streets and used into different criminal activity, that's a huge red flag. And not only for the community, but for ATF to look at that dealer and find out, are they one of our problem dealers? And oftentimes that would suggest that they are. So also with that, you're looking at the purchaser and the possessor, which can be, quite different. And when you have that mismatch, that the dealer says that they sold the gun to Steve Lindley, but it was used in a crime by Josh, that's a problem. How did that transfer happen? And why did that transfer happen? Depending on your locality, that transfer may have been illegal, or is Steve a individual who is trafficking in firearms? He's purchasing them from a particular dealer and then selling them to whoever. Again, that could be a giant red flag that in a short period of time, a particular purchaser is purchasing a high quantity of handguns, specifically the same make and model of handgun. Those are flags that the dealer should look at and say, you know what, they might have a problem here, and making the dealers part of the solution, not, of solving the crime gun problem, because they are oftentimes our first line of defense against this type of activity. And for the most part, most of them are doing a good job. We just need to identify the ones that aren't. Then now we have a problem that unfortunately did start here in California, and kind of the tsunami washed eastbound across our nation, is the epidemic of ghost guns. Ghost guns by design are sold to not to be traced by law enforcement and to not have a background check conducted of the purchaser. So they lend themselves as a perfect crime gun. And we've seen this explode in the last, just few years, where it was a small problem for law enforcement. And now the majority of firearms that are being collected by law enforcement agencies across the nation are ghost guns. So ghost guns by design, under previous federal regulations, they were meant or built in a configuration that didn't require them to be categorized as firearms. So what they did is they had to have a few pieces that you need to remove, or a few holes that you needed to drill, that made it less than 80% of a firearm. Now, there's some ambiguity behind what actually is 80%. And if you look at a ghost gun, it's probably easier to put together a ghost gun than most Lego sets. But nevertheless, it at that time met the regulations under ATF as not being a firearm, and those were sold at mass quantities across our nation, and hence the problem that we have here, because these ghost guns don't go through a regular background check process, and they don't have a serial number for law enforcement to trace. It makes it very difficult. So recovery data, we have all this great information. What does it mean? Well, data is only as good as your ability to analyze it. And a lot of communities don't have the ability to analyze it. And it's not like ATF provides that information freely to communities, to the public, to researchers, or even to other government entities. So we want to look at, all right, we're getting this data, what does it mean? When it comes to the recovery data, you really have to look at the type of crime or the reason that it's being recovered. There is a vast difference between firearms that are being used in shootings and on street crime as maybe being recovered for other reasons by law enforcement. For an example, out here in California, when law enforcement goes to a call or to a request on a domestic violence incident, even though there's no assault taking place or any battery, any touching, if they go to a household that has a firearm in it as part of a domestic violence, they're required to recover that firearm for 72 hours to make sure that it's not going to be involved in any future crimes dealing with that domestic violence incident. And law enforcement will recover that firearm as a crime gun. That's vastly different than taking it off of a gang member, yet it does look at the different trends that come from where these firearms are originating from. It can be very important. You also have to look at the age demographics. Who was purchasing it, who was in and up with the firearm, and the person in and up on it, again, at what age groups are they being recovered from? And then finally, you have prohibited and non-prohibited individual. Obviously, with the ghost gun issues, they're tailored towards people who are prohibited from purchasing firearms in order to, quote unquote, make their firearm at home. All those have importance to kind of get a better picture about the firearm problems in any specific community and what can be done with it. Not just saying, hey, I think they're coming from here, I think they're coming from there, but we have the data, we analyze the data and say they're coming from here. And that can have a vast impact on just the community being able to choose where they want to conduct their firearm or other sports activity purchases. And two, it really provides legislators with a stronger research-based ideas behind how to maybe stop these problems. Next slide, please. Okay, so a lot of things came out of the Pennsylvania 2022 trace report that Brady did. So I'm not going to go over each one of these. Again, they're there for you to look at. But the data sets that we really kind of concentrated on, because it was a vast report, was the recovered firearm characteristics, like I talked about before, the time to crime data. That was very, very important. The lower the time to crime, the more likely we have a problem with that particular dealer or someone in that dealer's employment. Information about the crime, again, vastly different, is where those guns are being taken from. Again, taken from domestic violence households where there might be a state mandate to remove the firearms from a domestic violence incident, as compared to taking firearms off the street from shootings, drug activities, burglaries, robberies, so on. So looking at just the possessor data, there's a lot when we talk about the demographics of the information that comes from that, and why we can glean from that as not only the problem for a particular community, but maybe the larger area up to statewide issues as well, and how we can curtail some of those issues. So Here in Southern California, specifically Los Angeles, Los Angeles has a pretty good control, or at least the city of Los Angeles, because of a lot of the laws that they put in place over the last 30 years. However, the surrounding cities don't have those same issues. So, if you look at the top 3 cities that supply Los Angeles with crime guns, is Pasadena, Burbank, and Glendale, both relatively affluent communities that are responsible for the firearms going to less affluent communities inside Los Angeles, oftentimes communities of color. So you see that disparity, that oftentimes white, wealthier communities are shipping the guns to poor communities of color. That can be very important when we look at how to address this, not only on a local issue, but on a larger geographical issue. All right, key findings from the data about California, or I'm sorry, the Pennsylvania crime guns. And I'll let you look at those yourself. I'll go over them very quickly. The Philadelphia and Pittsburgh areas contain the majority of the crime gun suppliers. Obviously, larger cities, a lot more people. You're going to see that pretty often in a lot of communities and cities that, you have big gun stores in big populations, and they can come from there. Dealers with the most traces tend to be independent businesses, but sales practices of chain stores also need improvements. I know that out here in California, I've had to work with a number of the bigger chain stores, and they're not so much, I would say, fearful of government or law enforcement, but they are fearful of their insurance companies. And oftentimes insurance companies have regulations in order to get their insurance, especially for larger retail stores that are relatively and happily draconian. So they want to make their insurance companies happy. So they do a great deal of training of their staff to reduce any liability, and part of that liability is reducing the amount of firearms that are traced back to them. So they want to do a better job in making sure their employees understand the law of that, not only the city, county, but also the state. So, but a lot of the guns do come from smaller independent businesses that might not be insured or have different insurance issues as compared to the big box stores. Crime guns circulate long after dealers are out of business. That is very, very true. If you can take care of a firearm, firearms can last, unfortunately, decades to well over 100 years. I know if you look at TikTok, if you look at YouTube, they still have firearm videos now of people using firearms from World War I that are now over 100 years old, and they're still in very good shape. It's a object that if you take moderate care of it, it's going to last a long time. So those are being circulated throughout our community, sometimes for decades before they might be used in a crime. Also, on top of that, some of these smaller independent dealers, they don't last long in business. They come and grow and go quite rapidly. So they may have flooded the market with firearms 5 years ago. They're out of business now, but those firearms are going to be circulating as crime guns for decades to come. Next slide, please. I think you probably can read the rest here. So I'm going to turn it over to Josh now. But before I do that, does anyone have any particular or specific questions about what I went over?
Does anyone have any questions at this point? Okay, no, you guys can just keep forging along.
Outstanding. Josh?
Great, thanks, Steve. And I'll do my best to follow you and bring this presentation home. I think it's important to say, right, there actually is, as many of you know, there was a prior New York State report that was based on trace data. And it is an important report. I'm happy to share that with folks if you haven't seen it before. And it included really important information. It included, as you can see here, the source states of firearms being recovered throughout New York. It included some time to crime data. It included some broad categories of types of guns being recovered. And I think importantly, it also included the percentage of purchaser-possessor mismatches. But the report, and as many reports do, also lacks certain information for a variety of reasons. It doesn't identify the dealers that were most responsible for the crime guns being recovered throughout New York. It doesn't have time to crime for those top dealers, which I think, as Steve explained, is really important, right? Guns are durable. And sometimes there might be a gun dealer that has a fair number of crime gun traces to them over the years, but their time to crimes might be very long, right? Which would not necessarily suggest trafficking, right? But what we want to see is for those top dealers who has the shortest time to crimes. That means that there's a high likelihood that traffickers and straw purchasers are targeting those stores to purchase for them for whatever reason, potentially ease of being able to make those purchases, those risky purchases at those types of stores. It didn't include information about guns being recovered, which of those were previously reported lost or stolen. I would say previously is particularly important word here. We were interested in learning how many of those guns were reported stolen before they were recovered, as opposed to those that are reported stolen after they're recovered, after someone knows that they were recovered. And then also it lacked certain key recovery data. There were a couple really interesting data points in here, and I heard some of it alluded to before. In terms of out-of-state guns, this report actually showed that about 3/4 of guns in New York State that were recovered were coming from out of state, but 44% of guns recovered in Rochester during this time period were recovered from out of state. So I think for Rochester particularly, new data will say, one, is it still an outlier, right? If so, why, right? I think also guns that had a low time to crime in Rochester, it was 23% as opposed to 19% across the state. And that suggests that maybe there's a little bit more trafficking in Rochester than in other areas of the state. That's something important, I think, to look at. And then actually the percent of handgun recoveries in Rochester was actually significantly lower than compared to the rest of the state, suggesting that there were more long guns on a percentage basis being recovered in Rochester. That information, I think, right, is old, first of all, right? It's already from 2010 to 2015. And I think an important part of this effort is to get more accurate, more timely data so that we can build solutions based on the most accurate and most timely data that we have. We'd like to see a report that is focused, of course, specifically on Rochester, but includes some of the key data that was missing from the statewide report, and of course, dig a little bit more into some of those, I won't say anomalies, but some of those statistics that seem to make Rochester a little bit different than the statewide averages, and see if those things are still true, and start exploring potentially why. Exploring potentially why, and then building solutions, right, is obviously the end goal here. A trace report, as I mentioned before, will only get you so far of providing a foundation of the data. Of course, no data is perfect, right? Every data is flawed. Every data has warts. That's just how the nature of data. But the more data that we have, the more that we can splice it, the different ways that we can look at it, the more we can actually learn from it, despite any imperfections in it, but also be able to start to understand that why, certainly better than the absence of any such data. And then, of course, the work begins of building solutions. And that's really key. This type of data empowers local grassroots actions. It could empower engagement with gun dealers. Maybe there's those out there that don't know that their guns are being recovered disproportionately in Rochester, and dialogue is key with them. For those that are not interested in dialogue or not interested in that, then maybe there are different options to explore. Some of those could be legal remedies. Some of those could be working with law enforcement. It's important to have accountability here, absolutely for the community, but to explore some of those types of legal solutions as well. Of course, local regulations could be a really important part here. What are the things that can be done locally? What are the things that can be done regionally? What are the things that should be done at the statewide level that we should be advocating for? I think there's a laundry list of solutions, right? That's absolutely true. And that laundry list is not fully written. I think there are new people coming up with new ideas driven by new data all the time. What the important thing here is to look at the data for what Rochester says and figure out which of those solutions that have already been thought of apply best to the community and look at ways to implement those, but also to start the process of thinking of new solutions, creative solutions that may go a long way here. And I can't emphasize enough that releasing a report with this type of data and studying this data is really the foundation for those for figuring out which solutions would be most effective and then working to implement those solutions. Here's just a few examples in our Pennsylvania Trace report of some recommendations that we came up with after studying that data. Now, granted, it's statewide data. It was a statewide data set, and the solutions would look a little bit different for, I guess Pennsylvania is a commonwealth. So for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania than they would for Rochester. Although, right, I think that with a neighboring state and having this information out there about the state of Pennsylvania, there's some really interesting things that we can cross-reference here and see whether we see patterns that are true in Rochester, if they're also holding true in the neighboring state of Pennsylvania. The solutions, and this is just a few that we put in our report, some are legislative, some are transparency and research focused, some are enforcement focused and law enforcement focused, some are more programmatic focused. And of course, the important thing is to allow the data to help guide those solutions. Just a real quick to end here before we open it up to questions. Just a quick update on progress since we're about a year since the announcement of this program. Getting this data is not an easy thing, right? Especially when the data has not been systematically aggregated before. And we've been working with Councilmember Lightfoot, with the mayor, with the RPD for quite some time in order to get access to this data. Our understanding is that that data, at least for the last 2 years, will be turned over to Brady for our analysis, hopefully within the coming months. We think it's actually really important to have as many years of data as we can possibly get, and given that 2022 is coming rapidly to a close, we're interested, of course, of getting all of the data that we can get right now, and then following up and getting the remaining data for the close of 2022. Our hope is to be able to get that data from RPD, have it all in our possession in the coming months. I will say that the analysis and the report writing is not necessarily a long journey. We're not dealing with tens of thousands of data points. We're dealing with less than that. And we think that once we have all of the data, the analysis and a report can be written within months. And then it becomes a conversation about hopefully, about the release of that report and the role that Rochester wants to have in the public release of that report. So that's just a very quick update. We think that we've made some strides in terms of about to get access to the data and having it in an organized format and being able to work with it. We're hopeful that we'll be able to turn something around once we have that very quickly. And our goal is to get a report for Rochester at a minimum in the first half of 2023. Let me pause there. Let me stop there. I'll take down these slides so I can see everybody on the screen a little bit better, and open it up to any questions about trace reports and the project.
Yes. So first of all, thank you so much for such a comprehensive report. I think that really opens up a lot of people's eyes to what a gun trace data report is and what it could mean for our community. And so, Councilman Patterson.
So has the delay in getting the data been ATF, the difficulty in the transfer of that information from ATF to RPD? And why would that be the case?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I don't want to speak for RPD here. There are often hurdles with ATF, and ATF, ATF is a law enforcement agency that also has, let's say, limited resources, right? And it's often difficult for them to engage and provide the data in a usable format at an aggregated level, based on their resources. We know that they can do it. We know that they have done it, and the trick is getting them to do it. But what we're actually pursuing is the data directly from RPD, that every time RPD has traced a gun, they do it as most law enforcement do. They do it on an individual level when a gun is recovered. ATF will ultimately provide a trace report. It's usually in a PDF format, which contains all of the vital information. And it's an effort of collecting that information from RPD, depending on where they've placed that information and that data. So that's ultimately, again, I don't want to speak for RPD on this, but we've engaged with them to understand where they are in that process. And our hope is that that process is coming to an end soon, and they'll be able to turn over the aggregated data, but also the raw data with it.
One of the things also, Councilman Patterson, that we were also realized in this, we were in a time situation where we were transferring from one administration to another as well. So one of the things that literally before we started this meeting, the current mayor, Mayor Evans, said to me that they're currently working on even updating the current MOU. So that's happening real time, as well as, we're transitioning to new administration, new staff, and we went through 5 police chiefs, exactly. And a lot going on, as well as the fact that they had to hire a person to work within RPD to do some data entry, because some of this stuff is just paper. It needs to be put into a electronic format. So all of those things have happened now. And again, I can't emphasize enough the recommitment from the current mayor to continue this and to get this, because one of the things I think we all can agree on is we need a gun trace data report. I think everybody could just agree, based on getting real-time, up-to-date information, so that we can create real-time solutions that are based on post-pandemic and what's happening right now. So I think that's just a common sense thing. Number 2 is I think we need it to be public facing. We need this data to be as public, and that's what Brady does. We don't just want to have data and have it hiding in the office or behind. We want hopefully my goal is for it to be a dashboard, to almost be like the open data portal that anyone can go to and get this information and find out, because I think we're going to be very shocked at where these guns are coming from. And I think it's going to be very interesting information for folks to know. And then, of course, the solution base, we're just one of many organizations, because there are many that do this work and that are working against anti-violence and things. But we want the people and the citizens to know that the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition is one of those tables where you can come and help when we get this information for us to start coming up with those solutions. And all of the new programming we have through the ARPA money, the different things that we're getting ready to do. But this is a table that's open to the entire community. Anyone can come and be a part of this Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition, as long as you have shared interests, which was eradicating, educating, and advocating against violence and gun violence within our community. So we want to use this data. We don't want to spin our wheels on what programming do we need to do. And it's going to help our other programmers and those of us that are doing things to take this data real time and be able to say, okay, now we know kind of how to formulate our programming or our prevention or our eradication efforts or our efforts with us out here advocating on our state levels too. What do we need to advocate for? And so we believe that this is an important tool to help us get to a place to have better real-time, up-to-date programming to come against this violence in our community. So we're very privileged, again, as council members, how we spend tons of money on reports getting companies, whether they're internal or external, to do reports for us. And to have Brady National, who done state reports. Now think about this, the magnitude of how our report would be tailored to Rochester as opposed to an entire state.
Yeah.
You know, so this could be very comprehensive report because they're used to doing reports for entire states, right? And we're asking them to just do one for Rochester. So, you know, we're very privileged. There's no taxpayer money that is being spent for this. I think this is a good use of their time, our efforts, make it very public facing, and then to give us actual North Star direction on what we need to be kind of, you know, looking at to do next. So again, you know, open up the floor, give you guys credit for doing this in a very timely fashion. I had the meeting scheduled to 7:30. We're doing great. So we want to just exhaust whatever questions that we may have. Council President Melendez has a question or a comment.
Yes, thank you. This presentation has been helpful. It's answered most of my questions. I have some follow-ups that I'm thinking about in terms of, you know, one of the things that we do every year is our budget. And in terms of this report and the timing, I heard you say that it could potentially be done in the first half of the year. In the report itself, will there also be recommendations to the city of Rochester for consideration, best practices from other places, things that we should be looking at that we can consider during the budget season?
When we do reports, we like to include recommendations. Those recommendations may be for the city of Rochester. They may be for the state of New York. They may be at the federal level. Again, it depends on what the data says. But we think a good report will have recommendations.
Okay, and then just in that same vein, I think one of the things that we really care about in this community is figuring out how we engage the public in this issue of violence intervention. And, you know, I think hearing the structure of this report and how this will provide the municipality with a bunch of data in a report form, I'm also concerned about whether or not is there a way for us to ensure that we support the administration in building the right infrastructure, that this data can be ongoing, not just be a report and done, but ongoing in a meaningful way. Is that something that Brady would collaborate with us on?
Yeah, we'd be happy to talk to you about that. We believe in data transparency. We believe in access to the data to the public. New York State has actually a dashboard that contains some crime gun trace information. A dashboard is a little bit beyond our capabilities here, but we're more than happy to continue to collaborate with you and see if we can find other folks that might be interested in doing that. And I think it's also really important, the systematic collection of this data by RPD, as opposed to looking backwards and getting everything later. If you want to have up-to-date statistics, there needs to be a process in place to be able to pull those statistics as they come in, as opposed to, every couple of years look back at it. So I think that that's something we'd be happy to talk with you about in terms of best practices and things of that nature. Those conversations naturally happen as part of this process, but we'd be more than happy to continue to talk with you guys and collaborate with you around those things.
Thank you.
Any of our, Kathy, yes, ma'am.
Josh, thank you so much for this great presentation, and thank you to Steve. I have a quick question. Earlier, Captain Mura was giving us information on the status of gun violence in the city. One of the issues he spoke to had to do with shooting victims, so where guns were used in shootings. And I have just a quick question about this. My question is it also important for the mayor and the city council to know when guns are being used in incidents, but a shooting did not occur, but they were used, for instance, in a robbery or maybe in a carjacking or something else like that? Is it important for the city council in terms of being able to understand and have a really good understanding of the impact of gun violence on the children in the community, on the families in the community? Is it important for them to also know when guns are being used in crime incidents, but a shooting didn't occur?
Well, the short answer to that is yes. Look, when we're dealing with trafficked firearms here, trafficked firearms are inherently dangerous. And, the fact that a gun was recovered because of an illegal possession, versus a homicide, right? It doesn't mean that that illegal possession gun wouldn't have at some point become a homicide gun in the future, right? And it's difficult to quantify these things, right? You're dealing with hypotheticals as opposed to actuals. But traffic guns are inherently dangerous because they're obtained by folks that are often prohibited or unable to have access to firearms for valid reasons. They are guns that are frequently used in crime. So I think just having access to as much statistics about trafficked firearms in Rochester, whether those guns were used in a violent crime or not used in a violent crime, whether they were used in a shooting or not used in a shooting, I think all of that underlying data does matter.
So just one follow-up, Josh. What would we call the category that we're asking RPD to report to the city council and the mayor on? That doesn't seem to be getting, at least not that I'm hearing, maybe I missed it, but that doesn't seem to be getting reported. What do we call this? The non-shooting use of guns in crime?
Well, I think, right, for the purposes of this report, we are looking for access to all firearms that were recovered and traced by law enforcement. We won't have trace data for guns that aren't traced by law enforcement. That's just not how the data collection can work here. So the data is only as good as the incidence of each individual data point that's put into it. I think it's important to understand Rochester, the RPD's tracing policy, right? And any of these caveats about data, as we work through this process, we will include in our report. And I think that's important. But ultimately, what we're talking about here are guns that are recovered by law enforcement and traced. And in that system, there should be a line item for type of crime or reason for recovery. And that is information that can be spliced and looked at from different angles.
So Kathy, it's funny, to that point, there's a report that council members get and the mayor gets. It's the weekly shots fired report. And it gives us some of that information. But what's really interesting about what you're saying is that we get regular press releases from RPD on various gun arrests that they perform. Now, we don't get a press release on every gun arrest that occurs, but in many instances, those gun arrests will detail the charges that were levied against the person for the illegal possession of the gun. So as I'm sitting here listening to you, I'm going, it really would be nice if we could get some manner of report also from RPD that kind of disaggregated out what the gun charges were on a weekly basis, with the understanding that you can arrest one person, they'll get multiple gun charges based upon the fact that in New York State, based upon the fact whether or not they're precluded from possessing a weapon that's a charge. There are multiple ways that they get gun charges. So that would be a useful indicator to see what's our process, what's going on. Yes, we're taking guns off the street, but and I'm not going to get into it, but one of the problems we have in New York State is that we routinely rearrest the same people for possession of illegal firearms because of the way our state law is structured. And I'm not going to get into that, but that would be something that we should have a conversation with RPD about, giving us some manner of report on, because we actually don't get a report on every gun arrest that occurs every week. We get the weekly shots fired report, but that's not every gun arrest.
Well, one of the good things we have, I agree with you, Mike and Kathy. We currently we've instituted through the president of council quarterly public safety meetings with our fire department and our police department and our 911. So now we have an opportunity in another platform, and that's also a public meeting that's had here in City Council that we can start giving in advance, because our meetings we had one meeting so far, we got another one coming up at the beginning of the first quarter of the new year. And so we can begin to start not only as we build a team around the prevention and suppression efforts. With this data, we can actually start asking for more data, because the open data portal is a nice model of how we can build out. And I think, I'm assuming, hopefully it can be built out and we can include some of these other things in it to be reported to and open to and transparent to the public. So we're taking a note of all of that. And again, these are the opportunities, and this is the kind of thing we want to do. And with the coalition, we see ourselves as brainstormers of ideas of how we can, do things to do suppression and prevention. And then give those ideas to our legislators and our CBOs and service providers and those who are doing this work. That's what this is all about. And so, does anybody have any other additional questions? Kathy, go ahead.
Josh, quick question. Could you speak a little bit to the issue of when a crime gun is recovered and whether or not it's important for the city council, for the mayor to know, for the RPD to know, was there a report filed prior to the gun being recovered? Was there a report filed on that gun being stolen versus the number of reports made after a gun is recovered and it's being reported stolen? And why that disparity, so to speak, if it exists, between reports made of guns stolen prior to recovery versus reports being made after recovery? Why would that be important for the mayor, for the city council, for RPD? Is it important to know? And what is the significance, might the significance of that be?
I'm actually going to kick this one over to Steve, who has the law enforcement background, I think, to be able to most thoroughly answer the question.
So having a firearm that's reported stolen, lost or stolen before the recovery just seems a little more legitimate. It's one of those things, it's kind of like a car. You just don't really lose a firearm or not report a firearm stolen because it's often part of maybe a burglary or a robbery associated to the victim. So when you have the firearm recovered and then you contact that individual that last purchased it and said, oh, that firearm was stolen 5 years ago. It's like, well, why didn't you report it stolen 5 years ago? It makes it a little bit less legitimate. It doesn't mean that it's not legitimate. It's just something that you maybe need to look at a little more seriously, and law enforcement should question the authenticity of that lost or reported stolen firearm after it's already been recovered by law enforcement as part of a crime. And that can be an indicator of trafficking, because a lot of individuals will purchase firearms and, until they're contacted by law enforcement, that's when they'll report it as lost or stolen and not give a whole lot of details about that particular crime happening. So, but again, that's also a good opportunity for law enforcement to follow up about the authenticity of that lost or stolen firearm. And again, every case is different, but it makes it less legitimate.
Okay, hold on, Kathy. I'm going to wrap things up here for our question. I'm sorry. Y'all know I'm a stickler about time. I like to start on time. I like to end on time. I respect all of your time. Everyone is so busy. I don't know what's the difference in California, Steve, as far as time. What time is it there for you? You're on mute, sir.
It's a 3-hour difference.
Yeah, it's 3 hour difference. So it's 4:20 for me.
Okay. Your day hasn't even started. Your day hasn't even ended yet as far as your 9 to 5 time. But for the rest of us, I want to get folks, it's of course Eastern time. It's almost 7:30. So I just want to take some time to thank our guests, all of you, Steve, Josh, Inez, our folks in Brady. I want to thank Ruth and Libby for joining us in person. And I just want to put out another plea. Thank our city council members for being here, our president, council member Melendez, Patterson, and Harris for being here with us. And all of you who joined and make up our Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition. After the pandemic, we had to kind of get the band back together, right? So the pandemic kind of put a little of a monkey wrench in, but we're back. We're back. We're rebuilding. Our meetings will be every first Tuesday of the month here at City Council Chambers. We did this intentionally. This is the people's building. It's open to the public. It's safe. It's free parking after 6 o'clock. And it's on the bus line. Okay, so the meetings, there are 4 doors open to these meetings. We're on Zoom. We're in person here at City Council Chambers. We're on YouTube on the City Council YouTube page, and then we're also on Facebook on our Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition Facebook page. We're on Twitter as well. We have an Instagram page, so it's easy to find us and stay connected. I want to thank Andre, my aide. We're rebuilding the website. We're updating our website. So start looking at that very soon in the new year. We put out a survey asking for folks what good time there is and what things we can do to better our meetings. And you can see we've made a lot of technological changes. Councilmember Patterson said that I should get a production award because I'm literally streaming. I don't think you know anybody else other than our council members who's streaming meetings. I think they did a meeting earlier this month for a race commission in this building, and it was horrible. But you can see our son. And I told them what to do, but they didn't want to listen. But the pandemic has taught us. I'm a pastor, so I run the church. It's taught me how to stream. So we hope that the experience is visually and audio is a good experience for everybody. We want you to have a great experience at these meetings and be able to share this video. Share this video with family, with friends, with your organizations. Take time to learn. Look at the report that was done in Pennsylvania. They've done 2 big reports now, Chicago, Pennsylvania. So there's a lot of learning lessons. I'm glad we weren't first. I'm glad we weren't second. I'm glad we're in the position we are, because I believe that as Kathy likes to say, she says gold. I'm going to step it up and say we want a platinum standard for Rochester when it comes to gun trace data and a public facing report that really can help us hold accountable. Our next meeting won't be till January 3rd. And we're going to take December off because I'm going to show you on my screen. In December, we have our Cut the Violence event, and hopefully you guys can see that. Our Cut the Violence event will be Monday, December 5th. It's next Monday at the David F. Gant Center, which is, I believe, in Councilmember Patterson's district. We will be there from 4 to 8, doing some of our prevention stuff, free haircuts for kids, free toys by the Toy Foundation. And we'll be there just loving on our citizens in our community, providing haircuts and stuff for them on that day. So we want to invite all of our members to come out and participate in that event. It's free. There's no city dollars. I want to be very specific. I keep talking about money because I keep hearing these comments about, oh, they're spending our taxpayer money doing a data report, or they're spending our taxpayer money for those free haircuts. And I want to let you know we've done over 38 events for free haircuts and not a dime. We don't get, it's all free. Nobody's getting paid, and we don't have any grant money. We don't get any city money, county money. We don't get a dime from anybody. This report is being done without a dime from city or county money. So you got to understand the passion and the heart that are coming from this stuff. This is not something that we have to do. We want to do because we're committed to the citizens of this community. And that is our purpose and our desire and our will. So we want, again, to implore any citizen that wants to be a part of this coalition, just reach out to Andre, andre.gully at cityofrochester.gov. You can reach out to me, Willie.lightfoot at cityofrochester.gov. You can call us at 585-428-6554, which is our direct line. or you can call me on my city cell, which is my work cell, which is 585-478-4603. And you can contact me directly. If you want to be involved in this coalition and be a partner with this coalition, reach out to us. It's open to anyone. There are no excuses for being a part of the solution. We want you to be a part of our team, and we're glad to be able to host these meetings and provide this information at large to our community. So again, hopefully everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Hopefully we have a safe Thanksgiving, a healthy Thanksgiving, and we're praying that if we don't see, because we won't be meeting in December, that you have a wonderful Christmas, a safe Christmas, and we're praying for our city. Continue to pray for our mayor, our leaders in our community, those who are on the front line, our first responders who are on the front line, especially those that are in the hospitals every day in our community. Continue to pray for those individuals. And thank you again to our people in Brady. And we look forward to working with you guys. And I will tell you, every month, we're gonna have a section on our agenda where we update our public on what's happening with the gun trace data report and where we are with the report, okay? So again, good night, everyone. God bless you. We love you. Be safe until we see you again. Blessings.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Excuse me? I'm located in Henrietta.